She ran a tiny roadside food stall, counting coins at night just to survive the next day. Some days, she went to bed hungry so her children wouldn't notice. Yet every afternoon, without fail, she saved 3 small plates with same faces. 3 homeless triplet boys who sat quietly nearby, eyes full of hunger but never asking for more. She fed them from what little she had, never expecting thanks, never imagining a future. Then one morning, the boys didn't come. Days turned into years. And just when life felt like nothing would ever change, 3 black Mercedes-Benz cars rolled to a stop in front of her tiny shop, freezing the entire street in stunned silence. Ngoy was not rich, not admired, not sheltered by comfort or certainty. She lived in a single room with cracked walls and a tin roof that leaked whenever the rain grew impatient. At dawn, before the city stretched awake, she would rise quietly, wash her face with cold water, and light a small stove. The smell of oil and spices filled the air as she cooked what little she could afford, just enough to sell, never enough to save. Her roadside stall was nothing more than a wooden table, uneven and worn smooth by time. She set it up every morning with careful hands, as if dignity itself rested on its legs. Some days business was slow. Coins dropped into her palm one by one, never together. Hunger was a familiar companion. Sitting beside her like an uninvited guest, she had learned not to fight. When rain came, it soaked through her clothes and flooded the narrow lane where she worked. When sickness came, she worked anyway. There was no safety net beneath her life, only the ground she stood on and the strength in her spine. And yet, every morning, before opening her stall, Ngoy whispered the same quiet promise to herself. Let me start again. She didn't ask for luck. She didn't beg for mercy. She only asked for another chance to endure. What Ngoy lacked in money, she carried in her heart. She noticed people others ignored. She spoke gently, even when the world answered harshly. When someone thanked her, she smiled. When they didn't, she smiled anyway. Kindness was not something she planned. It was simply how she survived. In a life where everything could be taken, kindness was the only thing no one could steal. Across a narrow road from Ngoy's stall, beneath a fading signboard and a crooked tree, sat 3 small boys. They were always together, always silent. Triplets, anyone could tell. Same sharp eyes, same hollow cheeks, same thin arms wrapped around knees that had learned to wait. Their clothes were never clean, never dry, never warm enough. Their feet were bare against concrete that burned in the sun and froze at night. They never begged. That was the part that unsettled Ngoy the most. They didn't stretch out their hands or cry for attention. They didn't follow customers or interrupt meals. They simply sat there watching people eat, watching plates come full and leave empty, watching a world that kept moving without ever noticing them. At first, Ngoy pretended not to see them, not because she didn't care, but because caring was dangerous when you had nothing to give. She already lived on the edge. One bad day could pull her under. One extra plate could mean she wouldn't eat at all. Still, her eyes found them every afternoon. One day, near closing time, she noticed something that stopped her breath. A man from a nearby shop had tossed him a single plate of rice. Just one. The boys didn't rush it. They didn't fight. They didn't grab. Instead, they sat closer together. One boy broke the food into 3 equal portions with his fingers. Another rearranged the rice, so no one would feel cheated. The third waited until the others nodded before taking a bite. They ate slowly, carefully, as if they had learned long ago that hunger lasted longer when shared unfairly. Something inside Ngoy cracked. That night, she slept with an empty stomach and a full ache in her chest. The next morning, she packed her stall as usual. Same wooden table, same small pots, same quiet hope. But this time, she cooked a little extra, even though it meant stretching her money thinner than it already was. When the boys appeared, sitting in their usual spot, she called out softly, "Come." They froze, unsure, suspicious. Children like them learned early that kindness often came with a price. She placed 3 plates in front of them, not leftovers, not scraps, real food. They didn't thank her with words. They thanked her with wide eyes and trembling hands. That day, Ngoy did not eat. And the next day, she did it again. And again. Sometimes she gave them rice. Sometimes soup. Sometimes only bread. On days when business was slow, she would pretend to taste the food while watching them eat, convincing her own stomach that it had been fed. She never asked their names. She never asked where their parents were. She never asked why they were alone. She knew the answers would hurt, and she had learned to survive without asking questions that broke you. The street noticed. Other vendors shook their heads. "You're feeding mouths that will never feed you back," one warned. "They'll bring trouble," said another. A man laughed cruelly and said, "Kindness won't pay your rent." Even customers whispered, "Why waste food on street rats? They'll get used to it. You'll regret this." Ngoy heard every word. She nodded politely. She smiled faintly. Then she did the same thing she always did. She ignored them because she wasn't feeding the boys for praise. She was feeding them because every time she looked at them, she saw something familiar. Hunger, not the kind that growls, the kind that waits quietly. Some days were harder than others. On rainy afternoons, when customers vanished and her pot stayed full, she wondered if she was being foolish. On nights when her head spun from weakness, she questioned her own choices. There were moments, brief and human, when resentment tried to creep in. But every time doubt rose, she remembered the way the boys shared. Perfectly, silently, fairly. And it reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that dignity could survive even in the worst places. Weeks passed, then months. The boys grew slightly stronger. Their eyes followed her with something new, not desperation, but trust. They began helping her clean the stall. One wiped tables. One fetched water. One guarded her pots when she stepped away. They still never asked for more. And Ngoy never offered less. Kindness cost her comfort. Kindness cost her pride. Kindness cost her sleep. But she paid anyway, because in a world that kept taking from her, giving was the only way she remembered who she was. And she had no idea that this quiet choice, made on a dusty roadside, was planting a seed that would one day return louder than any warning the street had ever given her. Business didn't collapse all at once. It faded. Customers came less often. The usual faces found cheaper stalls. Some crossed the road and never crossed back. On certain days, Ngoy would stand behind her wooden table for hours, watching the steam rise from her pots while no one stopped. The street felt colder, quieter. Money thinned. Ingredients shrank. Hope became something she carried carefully, afraid it might spill. That evening, the sky hung low and heavy. Rain threatened but never fell. Just enough humidity to make everything feel harder. By sunset, Ngoy lifted the lid of her largest pot. It was empty. She stared into it for a long moment, as if the food might return if she looked long enough. But there was nothing left to sell, nothing left to give. All she had was a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. Her dinner, the one thing she had saved for herself after a day of standing and smiling and pretending strength. She sat behind her stall and waited. Across the road, the three boys appeared, as they always did. Same spot, same quiet patience. They sat down without a word, already used to the rhythm of her day. Ngoy felt something tighten in her chest. She could have turned them away, just this once. No one would blame her. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the bread. It was smaller than she remembered, dry at the edges, barely enough for one person. She broke it, once, then again. 3 uneven pieces lay in her palm. She walked across the road and placed them gently in front of the boys. They looked up at her, confused. "There's no rice today," she said softly, forcing a smile. "Only this." The boys hesitated. One pushed his piece toward her, shaking his head. Another broke his portion again, trying to make it smaller. The third watched her face, searching for permission to refuse. Ngoy closed their fingers around the bread. "Eat," she said. "Please." They obeyed. She turned away before they could see her eyes burn. That night, Ngoy lay on her mat with nothing in her stomach and everything in her thoughts. Hunger clawed, but fear screamed louder. She wondered how much longer she could last. She wondered if kindness had finally broken her. Still, before sleep claimed her, she whispered the word she always did. Let me start again. Morning came with rain. Not gentle rain. Angry rain that soaked the street, flooded the drains, and turned the road into mud. Ngoy pulled on her thin shawl and hurried to her stall, heart strangely uneasy. The boys were never late. She set up the table, wiped it down, lit the stove. She looked across the road. The spot was empty. She waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Customers came and went, but the boys didn't appear. Ngoy wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the road, scanning the corners, the alleys, the spaces beneath shop awnings. Nothing. Rain soaked her hair and clothes as worry turned sharp. She asked nearby vendors. No, we haven't seen them. She asked shopkeepers. They're street kids. They move around. She asked strangers. Shrugs. Indifference. Silence. Ngoy walked faster, then ran. She searched under bridges, behind clothes shops, near trash piles where they sometimes slept. She slipped in the mud. She fell. She got up again. Rain blurred her vision, but she kept calling out, Come back! Where are you? Please. For the first time, she screamed, not just their names, but her fear, her regret, her helplessness. The streets answered with noise. Cars splashed past. Doors slammed. Life continued. By evening, her voice was gone. She returned to her stall soaked and shaking. The wooden table stood where she had left it, untouched. The pot simmered quietly, mocking her. They never came back. Days passed, then weeks. Ngoy left food at their usual spot, just in case. She watched the road until her eyes hurt. She asked everyone who might know something, police, vendors, beggars, drivers. No one had answers. Some said the boys were taken by authorities. Some said gangs recruited them. Some said they simply disappeared, like so many children did. None of the explanations brought them back. At night, Ngoy dreamed of 3 small plates lined up neatly. She woke reaching out, only to find cold air. Hunger returned, not just in her body, but in her heart. The street moved on. Customers returned slowly. Life continued its uneven rhythm. But something inside Ngoy stayed empty. She never forgave herself for that last day. She wondered if the bread had been enough, if she should have done more, if kindness had failed them in the end. Still, every morning, she cooked. Every afternoon, she looked across the road. And every night, she whispered into the dark, Where did you go? The boys never answered. And Ngoy believed with a quiet, aching certainty that whatever little light she had been to them had been taken away forever. Years did not pass loudly for Ngoy. They passed quietly, one afternoon at a time. Her hair thinned before she noticed it. Lines settled around her eyes, carved not by age alone, but by years of looking down the same road, hoping to see 3 familiar shapes appear. Her wooden table grew weaker. Its legs repaired so many times they barely remembered their original strength. And her body, once quick to rise before sunrise, now moved more slowly, as if each morning asked a heavier price. Still, she opened her stall. Still, she cooked. Still, every afternoon, without fail, her eyes drifted to the same spot across the road. The boys never came back. At first, the waiting was sharp, painful. Each sound made her turn. Each group of children passing by made her heart jump, only to sink again. She imagined them taller, cleaner, smiling. She imagined they had survived. Then time softened the edges, but not the absence. The street changed. New shops opened. Old ones closed. Vendors came and went. Children who once played nearby grew up and left. Prices rose. Buildings aged. Even the road was repaired once. Smooth asphalt covering the cracks where the boys used to sit. But Ngoy remembered exactly where they had been. She remembered how the middle boy always sat slightly forward, how one leaned left, the other right, how they always waited for her signal before crossing the road. Memory became muscle, automatic, unthinking, permanent. People notice her waiting. You still look for them? A customer asked one day, gently. Ngoy smiled but didn't answer. Another laughed softly. That was years ago. Street kids disappear all the time. Ngoy nodded. She had learned that arguing only tired her. Some were kinder. You did what you could, a woman said while paying. Let it go. Don't hurt yourself like this. Ngoy thanked her, but she never let go because forgetting felt like betrayal. Life didn't become easier. It simply became familiar. On good days, she sold enough to eat well. On bad days, she skipped meals and told herself she wasn't hungry. Sickness visited her more often now. Her hands sometimes shook while cutting vegetables. Her back ached when she stood too long. But she never closed her stall early. Because what if today was the day? What if they returned and she wasn't there? Sometimes, late in the afternoon, 3 shadows would stretch across the road at just the right angle. For a heartbeat, hope would rise, quick and foolish. Then reality would settle back in, gentle but firm. At night, when the street quieted, the memories grew louder. She remembered their hands, small but careful, the way they carried food as if it mattered, the way they never wasted a grain. She remembered the last bread she broke into 3 pieces, and how one of them had tried to give a share back. That memory followed her everywhere. There were moments, dark, private moments, when regret pressed so hard she could barely breathe. What if she had saved the money instead of food? What if she had asked for help? What if kindness wasn't enough? But those questions had no answers, only echoes. Years turned into a decade. Ngoy's stall became part of the street's background. People knew her as the quiet woman who never complained, the woman who charged fairly, the woman who sometimes stared across the road for no reason anyone could understand. Children sometimes sat where the boys once had. They were louder. Messier. They fought over food. They begged. They left. Ngoy fed them when she could. But it was never the same. Because she wasn't waiting for children. She was waiting for them. One afternoon, a heavy rain forced everyone to take shelter. Ngoy watched water rush through the street, carrying trash and leaves toward the drain. She thought of the day the boys vanished. How rain had swallowed her voice as she called their names. Her chest tightened. She pressed a hand to her heart and whispered, not in despair, but in quiet hope, if you're alive, I hope you're warm. That was how her kindness had changed over the years. It no longer reached outward with expectation. It stayed within her, steady, patient, unrequiring. People told her she was foolish. You won't get anything back. One man said bluntly. Ngoy smiled. She had stopped expecting anything long ago. Because real kindness doesn't bargain. It doesn't ask to be remembered. It doesn't demand proof that it mattered. It doesn't wait for closure. It simply exists, long after the moment has passed. Some nights, she dreamed of 3 plates lying neatly on her table again. Other nights, she dreamed of nothing at all. Both felt the same when she woke. Still, every morning, she whispered the same words she had whispered all her life. Let me start again. And every afternoon, as the sun tilted low and shadows stretched across the road, Ngoy lifted her eyes, not with desperation, not with expectation, but with a quiet faith that kindness, once given, never truly disappears. She did not know when the waiting would end. She did not know that the street she had stood on for so many years was about to fall silent in a way it never had before. She only knew one thing. Some acts of love are not meant to be returned. They are meant to endure. One ordinary afternoon, the street changed forever. The air was thick with heat, the kind that slowed everything down. Ngoy stood behind her familiar wooden table, stirring a pot, half listening to the sound she had known for decades. Voices bargaining, engines passing, footsteps moving on. Then the noise stopped, not gradually, all at once. 3 black Mercedes-Benz cars rolled onto the street and came to a smooth halt in front of her stall. Their polished bodies reflected the sun, sharp and unreal against the dust and cracked pavement. Conversations died mid-sentence. Vendors froze. Customers turned. Even traffic seemed to hold its breath. Ngoy's hand tightened around the spoon. She had never seen cars like that here. The doors opened. 3 men stepped out. They were tall, well-dressed, confident in a quiet way that didn't need to announce itself. Clean shoes touched the road where barefoot children once sat. Watches glinted. Their eyes scanned the street, then stopped on her. Ngoy felt something stirred deep in her chest, something she didn't recognize at first. The men walked toward her slowly. People whispered. Who are they? Did she do something wrong? Are those cars for her? The men stopped in front of her stall. And then, without hesitation, without pride, they knelt right there on the road. Mama, the one in the middle said, his voice breaking. It's us. The world tilted. Ngoy's spoon slipped from her hand and clattered to the ground. She stared at their faces, grown, strong, unfamiliar. But then she saw it. The eyes. The same eyes that once watched plates of food in silence. The same eyes that learned dignity before abundance. Her knees weakened. The boys had become men. They told her everything. How the morning after the bread. Authorities had taken them to a shelter. How months of fear turned into years of study. How one teacher noticed their discipline. How scholarships followed. How they refused to be separated. Ever. How they promised each other that if they survived, they would come back. All those nights we were hungry. One said softly, we remembered you. When we wanted to give up, another whispered, we remembered how you gave us food when you had none. The way you treated us, the third said, taught us who we had to become. Ngoy couldn't speak. Tears ran freely down her face as she touched their hands. Solid, warm, real. Alive, alive. They helped her sit. They wiped her tears like sons who had waited a lifetime to do so. Then they stood and turned to the street. This woman fed us every day. One said calmly, she gave us dignity before we earned it. The men handed her a set of keys. A real shop, with walls, with a solid roof, with running water, with her name on the door. Not charity. Respect. Ngoy shook her head, overwhelmed. I didn't do it for this, she whispered. They smiled. We know, they said together. That was why they came. The street watched in stunned silence as the wooden table was gently folded away. As the old stall closed for the last time, as Ngoy was guided, not carried, not rushed, but honored into a future she never asked for. Kindness had left her hands empty once. Now it returned full, not as money, not as applause, but as 3 living promises kept. And for the first time in years, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the road, Ngoy did not search the street. She simply closed her eyes and smiled. Ngoy never fed those boys expecting rewards. She fed them because they were human, because hunger deserved attention, because small hands reaching for food deserved dignity, even if the world didn't notice. And that is the truth most forget. Kindness never truly disappears. It waits, quiet, patient, unnoticed, until the moment it returns, multiplied beyond imagination. She gave her last piece of bread when she had almost nothing. She gave her time, her heart, her hope. Years later, life returned everything she had poured out. 3 grown men, educated, successful, alive, honoring her in ways she could never have dreamed. Because the smallest act of love, given without expectation, has the power to rewrite an entire destiny. Ngoy's hands, once empty, became the hands that held a lifetime of gratitude. And the street, for the first time, understood the true way to kindness.